So for this week's video, we have a Reaper miniature that just happens to be a Grim Reaper miniature. And I thought he would be perfect for Halloween. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start off doing the inner skeleton and his little skull face. And I think there's actually a couple little skulls down the bottom on his base. And for that, I'm just going to be using a couple of these colors. I'm going to start off with Camel Tan, and then I'm going to use an Airgrax Earthshade Wash and finish it off with some Bone White, because I figured that would be very fitting. Alright, so I'm just going to take a little bit of this Camel Tan. I don't think I'm going to need too much of this, because there's only a couple spots where there's skull texture. So I'm just going to go in here and start painting them. And I do have a zenithal highlight on that. A lot of that is going to be covered up. That's just kind of for me to remember where I'm putting some of the lighting from his lantern. I think it's a lantern. It also looks like an hourglass. So I might actually paint it like an hourglass, but make it look like the sand on the inside is glowing. I think that would be a really fun idea. And I do want to get some of that in the little eye sockets there too. And maybe a little bit underneath his chin. I'm not too worried about getting it in between his cloak too much. So I'm going to put other things there. But I'm definitely going to do his chest as well. And I think there's a little piece of fabric up there that's just covering just a little bit of it. So I'm just going to try to get in there the best I could. And you can definitely see his little rib cage a lot better now. And like I said, I think there's actually a couple little skulls down there. They're very small, but once I throw a coat of paint over them, it'll be a little easier for all of us to see. And don't forget the little eye sockets. And I think there's another one right here. And I don't want to get too much on his cloak because I'm going to leave that black for the most part because that's shadow. And I'm probably going to keep his cloak black. I'm going to add a couple other little colors here and there for shadow. But I'm thinking his cloak should be black. And there is a couple skulls on the back too. What do you know? I love these miniatures so much. Because you never know what you're going to find in some of them. Because it's so small. Fun little surprises. I'm not too worried about getting it on the rest of the base because I'm going to cover that up with a lot of different greens and brown colors, you know, earthy colors. So I just want to kind of outline where those skulls are to begin with. All right, now that that's nice and dry, I'm just going to go in with some of the Airgrax Earthshade Wash and just kind of fill in all the little details. Maybe not that much in one spot, but just kind of spread it around in there so you can kind of see more of the facial features. Same with the rib cage. Just want to throw a little bit of that in between the ribs. Perfect. And then down here for the little skulls, just going to make sure I really get those eye sockets, because that is, I think, the majority of the detail on the smaller ones down here. I think a lot of them are missing their bottom jaws. So, but that takes a little while to dry. So I'm just going to be careful not to touch the front of that. And just kind of fill in the little eyes. If you guys are wondering what that scratching is, I think my cat is getting into something. So with that being said, I'm going to let that dry and I'll be right back. So while that wash is drying, washes normally do take a little bit longer. I'm just going to start painting his scythe, and I'm going to start off with Leadbelcher, and that's a very dark silver. So I just want to be careful not to touch those skulls. But I'm pretty much just going to paint the whole thing in this dark silver. At least the top of this, anyways. And it's okay to leave a little bit of the black, just so you can kind of see a little bit of the detail. But for the majority, I'm just going to paint the whole top. And I just want to make sure I get enough underneath as well. And I think that should be good for now. Let that dry for a second. And then I'm just going to go in with the Runefang Steel. So, like I said, I'm going to give that part a minute to dry. But I am going to go in and paint the wooden staff. So I'm just going to be using Mournfang Brown for that. And that's going to be just a darker brown compared to what I'm going to go over it with. I'm just going to make sure I get the whole staff on the bottom here too. It's okay if a little bit of the black texture shows underneath. Kind of helps you see that really nice wooden texture. And I gotta be careful because I really don't want to get any of this on his cloak, but I gotta get on the inside of his staff there. And I believe there's some sort of ropes or ties around that, so I'm gonna skip that part as well. So I want to make that look. Psst. Oh, there's cats doing things all over the place today while I'm trying to make this video. Sorry about all the weird background noises, guys. She's playing with something. All right, so I'm gonna give that a minute to dry. Like I said, there's always that one spot underneath in between something that I miss. There we go. I think I got that. All right, so I'm just gonna use a little bit of the bone white, and I really don't need a lot of this because it's mostly a dry brush over these skulls. So I don't want too much, but I just want to lightly go over that and just kind of highlight his face. Just like that. And I'll do the same to the ribs. And might take a little bit more for the bottom skulls. And like I said, it's mostly just a dry brush. All right. Not sure how I feel about that one. I might redo that one. But I think these other two look pretty good. I'm actually just going to take a little bit of Airgrax Earthshade Wash for the wooden part of the staff and pretty much just coat that whole thing heavily. I really want to get in all of those little wooden grooves so you can see all of that detail. Maybe not that much there, but just a little bit in that area. That way you can really see a lot of the detail there. So for the scythe, I'm actually going to take some of the Airgrax Earthshade Wash and go over that, because I don't want this scythe to look brand new. And that gives it a little bit of a bronzier kind of feeling. Doesn't look shiny and new. You can still tell that it's metallic, but then you see a lot more of that detail. So that wash is going to take a little bit to dry. So for the bandages and wraps, I'm just going to go in with a little bit of bone white. And I'm probably just going to end up putting a wash over that as well, because I kind of just want it to be off-white. I mean, I'm starting off with a little bit of an off-white, but I want it to be a little dirtier. So I'm just going to do all of that. And I'm actually going to do that to his hands as well. So paint all of that white. I need to mix this with a little bit of water, because I don't want a dry brush for this one. I actually want it to be relatively wet. I see some of those bandages kind of hanging down. Make sure I get those. And I also see some down here as well. And I definitely want to try to get that inner hand. So I believe he has a little one down here too. I'm just going to try to highlight that a little bit with the white, the bone white. Just a little bit. And I'll also do the wraps on top of here as well. And like I said, here I don't want too much of the black showing. I really want to coat that in white. There we go. Just needed a little bit watery of a paint to get into all those small spaces. I don't know. They kind of remind me of mummy wraps, so I think that's what I'm going for. I know this is probably hard for you guys to see, but it's so tiny. I'm being very careful. Here we go, just highlight that a little bit. I'm actually going to do the other side of him as well, like his other wraps right here, while I'm using that color. I'm just going to do my best to kind of glide over and only get his hand for the most part, especially near the edge right there. And I think there's actually a little tiny, either a metal piece or a rope connecting that. So I'm just going to leave that one part. I did cover up a little bit, but I'm just going to leave that underneath next to that little hourglass. So before I go in with the wash, I am going to come back to the metal part of his scythe, and I'm going to go in with a little bit of army green and this yellow wash that kind of resembles rust, and I'm just going to add a little bit of color here and there just to give it that fun weathered kind of look. So I'm going to use the army green first because that is actually going to dry a lot sooner than that yellow wash. And I might just want to take a little bit of green here and just sprinkle a little bit on. Doesn't matter where exactly, as long as you just have a little bit of variation in that color. Even put a little bit in that detail where you can kind of see. I'm just being very careful. I don't want a lot of this. I want it to be very subtle. Maybe just put a little bit here, maybe some plant stuff or whatever he was chopping down with this got stuck in there. Maybe a little bit on the top. Like I said, you can highlight those details a little bit with that green. And it gives you a little bit of green mossy effect. And how much you put on there is whatever you're comfortable with. You can definitely put more than I did, or you don't have to do this part at all. And that's actually pretty dry. So, like I said, that stuff dries a lot quicker. I'm just going to take a little dot of this wash. Like I said, it says yellow wash, but it really does resemble rust to me. So I'm just going to take a very, very little bit of that and kind of put that here and there as well, just like the green. Maybe there's a lot over here in that detail where water gets trapped in that little space. And there you have it. And if you want it to be a little bit more metallic, which I normally do, I want it to look like it's shining, I'm going to go back in with the lighter silver, the Rune Fang steel, and just highlight the very edges. And I'll show you guys how to do that in a second. So I'm just going to take a very small amount of that very light, bright silver and just kind of glide right over the edges, and just the edges. Like I said, a very, very dry brush for this one. And for the top, I'm just going to put just a slight amount of silver right on the edge there. Actually, that might have been too much. Right on the edge under here. And when my brush is dry enough, I just want to kind of go over that little bit of detail right there. Just kind of highlight all of that. And you can see the more I brush it, the brighter silver it gets. And if you want to put a little bit more just on the top, because that's where light would be normally, you can do that as well. And that kind of gives it a little more of a metal texture after you put the weathered look on it. If you want it to really shine, you can just do one stripe. My brush might be a little too dry, so just one little spot here. Like I said, a very, very, very dry brush. Then you get that kind of shine right in the middle. You can also do that to the other side. I might actually need a little bit more paint for that though. Just go over it a little bit in the same spot over and over again. Then you get that nice shine. You can, however, if you really want to get detailed with this, you can go in with a very, very, very thin brush and just, and it is a wet brush, it's not a dry brush, right there. It's like a skinnier kind of spot right there like that. You can do that same thing on the back. Let's see, where exactly did I put that? Right across, just like that. That'll also give it a kind of shine. And you can do that as many times as you really are comfortable with it. I like to put a couple different size ones, just going down kind of like that. And there you have it. A different way to do metallics. So now that our mummy wraps are nice and dry, I'm just going to go in with some Airgrax Earthshade and put a little bit of a wash right in there. That makes them look even dirtier, which I love that grimdark effect that Airgrax Earthshade provides. It is one of my favorites. And I do want to get a little bit more in here where his robe is, just because I know that's going to be shadow. I just don't want to be, I just don't want too much on there because it's such a small area. So I'm actually doing the larger areas up here first before I do that little notch down there. I even think I have too much still. So I'll do the other side of him. And this part is a little tricky because I don't want to get too much on the top of the hourglass. I don't know if you can hear my cat whining in the background. I decided to put her outside of the room because she is getting into all of my craft stuff while I'm trying to make this video. And I really don't want her eating something dumb while I'm not watching her, so. And I think I have a little bit left on my brush for that very small spot. Perfect. And the mummy wraps are pretty much done. I don't do too much. I don't want them to be really bright. And I don't want them to be as white colored as the skull. So I think I'm going to leave them at that. You guys can always do a little bit of a dry brush with that bone white to highlight them. And I can even show you what that looks like. I'm not going to highlight it too much though, and only in one spot. And I'll show you guys why. I actually have a little bit of this bone white left on here. I'm just going to take a little bit of the drier paint with a slight dry brush and just kind of highlight that spot right here. Just be careful because my wash might still be a little dry. Just right there, only because I'm going to go in with the blue that I'm going to do his hourglass, and I'm going to highlight that to make it look like it's light. And that's the fun part of this video. So to finish off the wooden part of his scythe, I'm just going to dry brush a little bit of the Steel Legion drab. That's what I normally do all of my leather colors in. But I just want to take a very, very small amount of that. Like I said, dry brush. Make sure that's nice and dry. And I just want to kind of highlight those wooden textures a little bit more. Like I said, just be very careful. Dry brush. You don't want too much on there, but just enough so you see all that nice wood grain. Just give it a little highlight. One spot is very tiny. All right, and your wood is finished. And I think that wood grain looks beautiful. And almost everything is finished on this guy except for all the fun lighting effects and the base. And of course I want to save all the fun lighting effects for last. So I think I'm actually going to do the base next. So I'm just going to take a little bit of Buckeye Brown and kind of just coat the whole base in that color. And it is okay to leave a little bit of the black detail underneath. That is more than fine. But I do want to make sure I coat everything without touching anything that's wet in a brown color down here. And I do see now that I put a little bit of paint, there are a couple of stones there. So we can also paint those as well, even though I'm going to go over them with a gray. And just make sure I get all of this dirt under here. And I'll let that dry. And then I'll add some green as well. So I'm just going to take a little bit of dark stone, which is basically just my dark gray color. And I'm just going to highlight those stones on the bottom of the base with a little bit of that. Maybe I need a little bit more paint. Something about this dark stone color. It mixes very well. It's very liquid. It just doesn't stay that way. See, there you go. That's the dark stone that I know. And I'm just going to paint those that color. And just highlight them just like that. So while the base is drying, I'm just going to take a little bit of my army green that I used for the top of the scythe, and I'm just going to put a little bit in the areas of his bandages and kind of give them the same I've been living in a grave for thousands of years kind of vibe. And just highlight a little bit of green here and there. Not a whole lot, just enough to kind of break up those colors. Give it that nice, grotesque, grim dark kind of feeling. Now that our base is dry and I already have some army green out, I'm just going to take a little bit of that and I'm just going to highlight some areas here and there. With a little bit of green. I'm really not sure what's going on in this area, but I'm sure the nice wash we put over everything will help. And I'm going to actually go over the stone with some uniform gray. And just take a very little bit of that. I don't want too much paint for this. I just want a little bit over the top. Just like that. So we have a little bit of stone broken up with all that dirt and skulls and moss and everything else. I'm actually going to highlight the stones with just a little bit of spaceship exterior, and that is more of a colder white than an off-white. And I only want a very, very small amount of that before I do this. And I'm just going to kind of go right over the very top with a little bit of dry brush over each stone, just to make it look nice and dry like stone. You could see a little bit more of the texture. Like I said, I don't have a lot of paint on there at all. And then your base is pretty much finished. But I always go over with a wash just to hide all of the little places where things meet. And if I just take a little bit of the Aerograx Earthshade, and like I said, I'm unsure about what's going on a little bit in this area. So I just want to take a little bit of that darker wash and kind of put that in there. Some of the darker areas under here and underneath here. You don't have to put it everywhere. Like I said, you can have a little bit of variation, kind of how you did the army green. Just makes some of the brown look a little bit darker. Sorry, I think I went off camera for a second there trying to reach. Just trying not to cover these skulls under here, but I do want to get some of the wash in that little area there. And there you go. Your base is finished. So for his hourglass, I'm going to be doing a very bright cyan color. And this is not the color that it says it's on there. And I will show you guys how to make this color. So I actually started off with Blaster Blue and Starfire Yellow. And both of these are UV reactive, so they will glow under blacklight. But in order to get this color, I need 3 parts of the Blaster Blue, and I need 1 part Starfire Yellow. So any blue that's basically primary blue and any neon yellow will work for this. And I will show you guys how I got that. So like I said, I need 3 times as much of this as I do the yellow. So you can see the amount that I have there. And you can see, and no, I'm not going to mix them right off the bat just in case. You can kind of, if I can get some yellow out. That's why I didn't mix them off the bat. You never know how much you're going to get exactly. But I'm just going to take a little bit of that yellow and I'm going to mix it in with that green, or the blue, to make that green. And you can see here, it's starting to turn into that bright cyan color. So if I take a piece of paper and you can actually match those up pretty well. And this is up to you guys whether you want to add more yellow or more blue to get different colors. That is the color that I'm going to be going with, and that's the color that I have pre-mixed for this video. I just want to make sure I have enough of it, and honestly, I use this color so often. So it's definitely worth it to pre-mix it for me. But I'm definitely going to need a very much smaller brush for this part. But if I take my brush and just get a lot of that paint off, I can show you guys a nice sneak peek. Make sure you have a nice dry brush for this. And you can kind of, where I put the zenithal highlight, and I'm doing, to get that zenithal highlight, this is the same exact technique that I used. I just dry brushed all of that area where there's going to be a lot of light. And I don't want to get it past those 2 points because underneath here is shadow. And I only put a very small amount of white on here. I am going to highlight and put a little bit more just to make it even brighter. But this is our darkest light color, I guess you want to say. I just want to highlight that a little bit. I can actually take a little bit more and just put a slight amount right there. That's why I wanted to highlight that part earlier. You can even throw a little bit right here where there might be a little bit of light. And that was my wrist. Hope that doesn't gross anybody out, sorry. And there is a little bit of light emitting from the back as well, so I'm just gonna lightly dry brush that little area right there. And once my brush is very, very dry, I'm just gonna go over slightly just like that to get that nice glowing effect. And how much you do this is up to you. I kind of just do it until I think there's enough color kind of spread around evenly. And I don't want to put any on the top of his shoulder right here, only because his arm would technically make that shadow. So the one thing that I really do want to highlight before I'm done with his cloak is that little ring around the outer edge. And I'm just going to be using a matte white to do this. I'm just going to take a very, very, very small amount of that. I mean, very small amount. And just take a little tiny bit of white and just go right around the edge here on this side. Because I want that to be very, very bright. His head's right next to that lantern. The same with right here. I want that to be super bright, as well as this edge underneath here. And this edge right here. And you can kind of see where the dry brush touches those, excuse me, those edges. Just highlight maybe that one right there. And when you put the teal paint over that again, it's gonna pop even more. Even some of these, just highlight some of that in there. And this is far more of an opaque white than we did when we did the Zenithal highlight. So I really just want to highlight the areas that are the closest to that hourglass lantern that's going to be glowing. And that should be perfect. All right, so after those white highlights are dry, I'm going to go in with a little bit of paint, not a dry brush, but with the solid teal color that we made, and just go right over that. You can see it is a very, very bright color. I do have a lot of paint on my brush, but I'm going to just spread it around a little bit and just cover all of those white areas with that solid color. You can see that really, really highlights it. And you can see you get that variation between very light, medium, and then dark. And that's what we're looking for as far as light effects go. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. I'm good, but I'm getting over it. All right, so I'm just going to go over the white part on his cloak. And I just want to make sure that I'm getting all of the white covered with that turquoise. And I know it's a little tough. I just got to use a very small brush. And there you go. all of the light effects are pretty much done, except for we have to paint the hourglass. And that is going to be a little bit different because we're going to start backward, like what's farther behind, and work our way out in the front. So for the outside of this, I wanted to make it look like a brassy or bronze color, so I'm going to be using Ruin Lord Brass. But before I do that, I'm actually going to go inside of there with this cyan color and just paint the bottom of this just a little bit. Now I'm not going to go over that part because I'm going to make that look like the brass color, but I do just want to put a little bit of that paint down the bottom of that because that's going to be the sand in the hourglass. And this part is very tricky because it is so small. And it's basically just like a little stripe on the bottom. And I'm actually going to do that same thing to the top, but not this part. I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to do that same little stripe just to start out. And bear with me, like I said, this is a very, very small area, and it is a little hard to get it on camera. Okay, so now we know exactly where our sand is going to be. And I want to make it look like the sand is piling up on the inside. So I'm just going to take my brush and just take a little point up there just like that. And then maybe a little tiny dot above that. And I think that is all right for that side. You can take a little point up here and just make it look like a little bit of sand. And on the back. Doesn't have to be perfect necessarily. You just don't want it to be one even stripe on the bottom because you want to make it look like that sand is building up, and when you turn it to the side it's glass and you can still kind of see that sand building up. For the top though, I do want to add just a little bit more just to make it uneven and not a perfect stripe. So that'll be our sand in our hourglass. And I do want to get the very bottom as well because that should all be sand falling to the bottom. And the reason why we're doing the sand inside part first is if we accidentally go over that, we're going to paint that black to do the metallics anyways. So I'm just going to try my best to get right underneath there. So for the rest of the hourglass, I'm actually just going to take a little bit of that matte white I had before and mix a little bit with that cyan color that we made just to get a little bit lighter of a color than the original one. And I'm just going to put a little bit of that above that, just so the whole thing isn't completely white. So you don't have to cover all of the white, but the majority of it shouldn't just be that white color. It should be a lot lighter of a color, like a pastel almost. So you can see it's not completely white. Because I am going to go back in with white and highlight to make it look like it's glass. Sorry, might need a little bit of water. I'm just going to get in there the best I could. This part doesn't have to be too perfect. It's going to be a fun glassy effect. So So the same way we made our turquoise color lighter, we're going to make it a little bit darker, but instead of using black, I'm actually just going to use a little bit of this uniform gray I had left over and mix a little bit of that just so I can get a more muted cyan color. And for that, I'm just going to put a couple little small dots down there. I think I need a little more teal for that, just to give it a little bit of shadow down the bottom. I'm just going to do that in a couple of areas down the bottom. And like I said, I'm not using black because I don't want it to be super dark. But just where that metal ring is there, that's going to leave a shadow, just a little bit. And that gives you a little bit more depth with that. To put the highlight on the hourglass, I'm going to be using a matte white, and you can see the difference. This is my spaceship interior, that is the off-white, and this is the matte white. Titanium white will also work for this. Just need the whitest white, I guess. And I'm actually going to take a toothpick and I'm just going to put a little swipe right there and right there. Just like that. And I'm going to clean off my toothpick just a little bit and just put a very, very, very small dot right above it. Just like that. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. And to make the hourglass shiny and glossy, I'm going to be using this effect paint, the gloss varnish, and I'm basically just going to coat the entire thing in that. Oh, more than I expected. All right, I'll just take a little bit of that, and I'm just going to coat the entire thing in this fun glossy color. And it's okay if you get it on the rings. We're going to go over that, like the little metal parts. So this normally takes a little bit longer to dry as well. So definitely give that an extra minute. But now it definitely looks nice and glossy. I just don't want to get too much in where his hand is right there. That'll take a very long time to dry. But nice and shiny. It's very hard to tell if your gloss is dry. I actually just kind of tapped it because it looks shiny no matter what. But for the metal parts of the hourglass, I'm just going to take a little bit of black on a thin brush and kind of just cover those white parts right here where I'm going to have the metal. And that's basically just like a thin stripe around the middle and the bottom and top. So you can see just a little stripe there. And this has a little point in it, so I'm just going to go up into that area first. And then just take my brush and glide across the bottom, just like that. And I do want to make sure I get all of the white covered. In that spot. And this spot under here is a little tricky. I don't want to get on his cloak where I put all that light effect. There we go. And for the top, just gonna glide over that spot right there, right at the base of his hand, the best that I could, because it's a tricky area. And I do think there is a little metal thing connected right there. So I'm just going to take a little bit of black and stripe that up. And I kind of want to follow that around because I think it is wrapped around his hand. And it is. It comes right back down around this part. Right in here. There's a little attachment. I do want to just make sure I get the rest of that. In the top there. There's like a little indent in here that I want to be black. Perfect. Alright, so it should look something like that for now. Let that dry and then we'll go over with our bronze color or brass. I mean, technically you can use copper or regular metal. It's honestly up to you guys. Alright, now we're going to go in with our brass color. I'm using Runelord Brass. And it looks a little chunky, but I did mention that the metallics are kind of like that. So I might just want to take a little chunk out of there and mix it with a little bit of water. I don't like putting water in the container necessarily. Makes it a little funky. So once I got a little bit of that, a better texture, I'm just going to go in and go right over the black with that nice metallic. I think I might have too much water, so I'm just going to use a little bit of the thicker stuff and go over that just a little bit more. Just like that. And I'm pretty much just going to cover all of the black spots. So even this little handle right there, I want all of this to be metallic. Fun thing about that gloss is if you accidentally get a little bit of paint on it, it wipes off very easily. And it is okay if a little bit of the black still shows. Just gives you that little bit of detail. Dry brushing metallics on black still makes it look very metallic. Gold that I'm going to use is actually Retributor Armor. And it's a very warm gold, so it's a little more on the yellowy side. And I just want to take a very, very small amount of that and then just highlight the front of that right in one spot. You can even put a little bit right there, just to kind of give it a little more of a shine, like that bronzy, brassy color. Perfect. And there you have it. All your lighting effects and everything are done. I'm also going to be using a very dark brown and a very dark gray. I have Buckeye Brown and Dark Stone, and I'm just going to take some of that along with my Army Green, and I'm just going to kind of fill in a little bit of these areas with some downward strokes, just to kind of break up some of that black and kind of show you a little bit of the detail. So you could even dry brush a little bit in this inner corner here, just to show up some of the detail there. And on the side of his head, would have to move my finger for that part. You can put a little bit of green just to break up a little bit of that black. So I'm also going to do the same thing to the back. I'm going to make sure I go in these downward strokes just to kind of highlight some of that black. Maybe his elbow is a little worn out. And all of these nice details here. I just want to highlight just a little bit. Just like that. So his cloak still is black, it just has a little bit of variation to break it up. And I'm going to do the same with my dark brown, my Buckeye Brown, and I'm just going to highlight some spots just like that. Maybe a little bit more on his belt here. Maybe that's a little browner. And here I think he should be a little dirtier. And maybe we'll take a little bit of the stone gray and just put some right there and over here. Maybe at the bottom of his cloak where he looks nice and dirty. And do the same to the back. Take a little bit of brown. And I'm okay with these colors mixing because they're all kind of together, being dirty, being a dirty cloak. And just highlight a little bit of the detail with some brown. Downward strokes in that area. Put a little bit of brown at the bottom here. As a matter of fact, I think I want to take a little bit of green because he's got mold and moss and stuff growing on him. He's been in a grave. He's an oldie and a moldy. And there you go. That breaks up a lot of that black, but you still get the effect of a black cloak. And here is our final product. I think this came out really beautiful. And if you guys really like the way this came out, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for my next video. I am actually very new to YouTube, so it would definitely help out the channel if you guys stuck around with me. Till next time, guys, and happy October.